Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
they see what's going on and they can't believe this is taking place in our country.
President Trump visits Kenosha. Hear from Illinois Congressmen on unrest and COVID-19.
We're calling all debts.
Black state officials unveil their list of legislative demands. President Trump's payroll tax deferral begins today. What you need to know. There are more homicides in Chicago this year than all of last year, and there's still another 4 months left in 2020. We dig into the numbers. The death of actor Chadwick Boseman puts colon cancer in the black community in the spotlight. How the Chicago area is perfectly placed to be a global leader for quantum research and computing that could transform the world. A drummer with international roots records his new album in Chicago.
There's a lot to this place that we keep discovering.
And renovations and revelations at a historic Southside Tavern. But first, some of today's top stories. President Donald Trump traveled to Kenosha, Wisconsin today against the wishes of the city's mayor and other elected officials. The visit came 9 days after a Kenosha police officer shot 29-year-old resident Jacob Blake 7 times in the back, resulting in widespread protests and some riots in the city. Trump toured damaged buildings Tuesday and met with leaders of local law enforcement, where he praised their efforts to quell unrest in the city. He also spoke out against, quote, anti-police rhetoric across the country.
You know, the sad thing is you can do 10,000 great jobs as a policeman or a policewoman. You can do an incredible job for years, and then you have one bad apple or something happens that's bad. And that's the nightly news for 3 weeks. That's all they talk about. They don't talk about the thousands and thousands of good jobs, the lives that you save, they never talk about.
3 more states have been added to Chicago's emergency travel order list. Travelers from North Carolina, Hawaii, and Nebraska will now be required to quarantine for 14 days when visiting or returning to the city. They join 18 other states and Puerto Rico. Chicago Public Health Commissioner Allison Arwady says neighboring Indiana technically qualified to make the list this week due to a surge in cases, but she says the state was kept off due to a change in data reporting and many of the new cases coming from college campuses. Still, Dr. Arwady says Indiana could be added next week.
So we made a decision not to put Indiana on the list this week. I certainly, though, want to let Chicagoans know that we have concerns about Indiana, and particularly would encourage you not to travel to college and university towns in Indiana. If we don't see improvement across the state, we will then add them next Tuesday.
Chicago is reporting an average of 348 new COVID-19 cases this week, a slight decline from last week. The Illinois Department of Public Health is reporting almost 1,500 confirmed cases of coronavirus since yesterday, bringing the statewide total to more than 236,000 cases. State health officials also report 39 additional deaths for a total death toll of more than 8,000. And now to Phil Ponce and members of Congress. Phil.
Brandis, as we mentioned, President Trump visited Kenosha today in the wake of the police shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake, and after 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse was charged with killing 2 protesters. Both Wisconsin's governor and Kenosha's mayor asked the president not to visit. The president said he wanted to thank law enforcement. His Democratic presidential opponent attacked the president's motivations.
One of the reasons I'm making the trip today and going to Wisconsin is we've had such a big success in shutting down what would be right now a city that would have been Kenosha, a city that would have been burnt to the ground by now.
The incumbent president is incapable of telling us the truth, incapable of facing the facts, and incapable of healing. He doesn't want to shed light. He wants to generate heat, and he's stoking violence in our cities.
Joining us to discuss Kenosha and much more are Congressman Danny Davis. He's a Democrat whose 7th congressional district includes parts of the west side of Chicago and many near western suburbs. Congressman Brad Schneider, a Democrat from the 10th Congressional District, which covers a portion of Chicago's northern suburbs in Cook and Lake counties. And Congressman Rodney Davis, a Republican whose downstate 13th Congressional District includes parts of Champaign and Sangamon counties, among others. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And Congressman Rodney Davis, if I can begin with you, is the president stoking violence as candidate Biden asserts?
Absolutely not. The president should be in Kenosha right now. It's a disaster. And that's what presidents do. They go and make sure that when communities are hurting and when we've seen the destruction and the death that we've experienced in places like Kenosha, he needs to go. And I'm glad he did. But unfortunately, we have other cities where we have leaders that are feckless to those who are rioting and looting for even 95 straight days in places like Portland. That's got to stop. We cannot have people chanting death to America in our cities. We need to do more to come together and recognize we live in the greatest country in the history of the world.
Congressman Danny Davis, speaking of Portland, the mayor of Portland has said basically what Joe Biden said, that the president's rhetoric has created an atmosphere in which this violence cannot come as a surprise. Your reaction?
Well, I think the president is indeed a disaster, that the president is a disaster. Rather than trying to harmonize relations and bring people and communities together, the president's actions and behavior, as well as his comments, are doing just the opposite. I cannot imagine some of the things the president has said relative to what's causing all of the turmoil that's existing in our country. And I guess the only thing I can hope for is that November the 3rd, hurry up and come so that we can elect another president.
Congressman Schneider, local leaders, we mentioned the mayor of Kenosha as well as the governor of Wisconsin, specifically asked the president not to come. Should he have avoided coming to Kenosha?
Well, thanks for having me on, Phil. I tell you, the tragedy of Kenosha is an example of something that calls out for presidential leadership. And I wish we had a president like George Bush, who after 9/11 went to New York and was able to speak and pull the nation together. I wish we had a president like Barack Obama, who after Charleston went to Mother Emanuel AME and literally lifted up the nation. But we've seen that this president's either unwilling or more likely unable to rise to this moment. Rather than uniting the country, he has stoked the divisions. He has spoken of divisiveness. He has condemned the peaceful protesters and yet fails to condemn a 17-year-old man who carries a gun across state lines and ends up in a situation where 2 people are murdered. So I want the president to lead us. I want a president who can unite us. This president has demonstrated that he's going to seek to rather divide us.
Congressman Rodney Davis, as far as the 17-year-old who's charged with those 2 killings, the president has essentially defended him, saying that he appeared to have been trapped and he may have had no choice but to do what he did. Your thoughts on the president's comments regarding the Kyle Rittenhouse?
The president's actually taking questions from the media. I think that's something that Vice President Biden ought to be able to do too. But in the end, I'm going to let the legal system play out in all cases. But when we talk about rhetoric, I mean, I was somebody who, because of dangerous rhetoric coming from folks on the other side of the aisle for years, I had to dodge bullets on a baseball field from a crazed gunman who was a Bernie bro who was screaming health care at us while he was trying to kill me and my friends a few years ago. Just recently, we saw Speaker Pelosi call every Republican enemies of the state. That's not the type of rhetoric that's conducive to bipartisan solutions. I certainly hope, and I've asked her to apologize. She has yet to do that. So let's make sure we tone it down from the speaker. I've asked the president numerous times to tone down rhetoric and many others. But unfortunately, in this heated political environment, what you get is you get partisanship. And partisanship is one of the greatest threats to our country. As a matter of fact, I think that's the reason why the mayor and the governor of Wisconsin asked the president not to come when he should be in Kenosha.
Let's switch gears, and Congressman Rodney Davis, you mentioned Speaker Pelosi. The White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows appeared on Meet the Press this past Sunday, and he said that it's Speaker Nancy Pelosi's fault that the latest coronavirus relief bill has been stalled. And here's some of what he had to say.
Here's the problem is she puts forth a number, suggests that she came down, and yet she's willing to turn down $1.3 trillion of help that goes to the American people because she would rather them have nothing than to give way on what her fantasy objection might be.
Congressman Danny Davis, fair to blame Speaker Pelosi?
Well, you know, Mark's office was next door to mine before he became chief of staff. And he's a good spin master. So he puts a spin on the fact that we passed the TRIO Act, which would have put more than $3 trillion to work on dealing with the coronavirus. And the Republicans have been unwilling even to meet us halfway where we need to be. And even the $3 trillion is not enough. We need more than that. And so the president did a good job of selecting a spin master like Mark to be his chief of staff. Of course, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. We need the $3 trillion plus some more.
A quick reaction from Rodney Davis, Congressman Davis.
Well, you know, I used to serve, I enjoyed serving with Mark too. I used to sit across the table from him and negotiate. And frankly, I'm pretty surprised how far Mark's gone. He never would have gone as far as he did when he was sitting across the table from all of us as one of our colleagues. So I know the administration's moved. Steve Mnuchin today testified that the president wants to see progress, but just throwing out a $3.4 trillion wish list that even the most liberal journalist in Washington said would never become law does not mean that that's a good starting point. Let's fill the holes that exist. Let's make sure we get our economy going again, but let's not put things like 70 pages of election reforms that have been on the Democrats' wish list since day one in this Congress in there in a pandemic, and it's going to last longer than this election. That's the type of negotiation we need to have to pull some of those things out.
And gentlemen, that's where we'll have to leave it for now, but we'll be joined again later by Congressman Danny Davis, Brad Schneider, and Rodney Davis later in their program to discuss more on the U.S. response to the pandemic. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Phil, thank you. Protesters have consistently taken to the streets since the death of George Floyd. In Chicago and across the country, there's been a demand for change. Black legislators are beginning to unveil what they envision that looking like on the state level. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Brandis, the Illinois General Assembly barely met this year due to COVID-19, but they are scheduled to get back to Springfield for a few days in November, shortly after the election. And look for the agenda then to be immense. What with the coronavirus and possible budget adjustments from that, calls to address corruption, and also the just unveiled demands of Black legislators.
You see, this is very personal for each and every one of us.
They want to capitalize on the uprisings, all the attention that was ignited by George Floyd's killing to bring an end to the oppression and to the systemic racism that the Black Caucus's leader, State Senator Kim Lightford, says has infiltrated all levels of the law, economy, and government. She says it is an opportunity to leverage a unique moment so Black moms like her can have hope for the future.
Knowing that our children and our grandchildren will not share the same kind of life experiences that everyone in my generation and every generation before me have had to endure as Black Americans.
Now, at this point, the legislative wish list is vague because it is still in development, but it is organized around several pillars, aiming to focus on, for example, criminal justice, education, healthcare, economic equality. Legislators say that they are going to hold a series of hearings in the next couple of months that are focused on those issues. And the first of those was focused on policing, and it actually took place this afternoon. State Representative Sonia Harper says her constituents live in two versions of Chicago. Two versions, she says, that highlight the need for overhauling criminal justice, housing, and land use laws.
The only reason we're here discussing criminal justice problems is because we have an economic justice problem in our community and of no fault of our own. I represent the beautiful 6th District, comprised of vulnerable South Side neighborhoods as well as the downtown high-rises. I represent Inglewood as well as City Hall. I represent back of the yards, but also River North.
Without concrete measures, it is difficult to predict what the reception to Black lawmakers' agenda is going to be. But so far, the Democratic leaders who really call the shots in the General Assembly have given their vague support. State Senator Don Harmon offers this: the Black Caucus is showing us the path to a better Illinois. I look forward to being an ally and helping win approval of needed reforms. And then House Speaker Michael Madigan, via a statement, says he has been reflecting on injustices faced by communities of color. I am committed to working with everyone seeking changes to address those recommendations and enact policies that finally start to provide equal justice under the Constitution. Public attention's clearly very focused on inequalities and doing something about that, and Black lawmakers say they won't let this moment slip.
We are now at a moment where our white colleagues that have been raised in white communities that just didn't understand what we were talking about are now uncomfortable. They are so uncomfortable now that they are hearing all of the asks that we had before.
We are not here to placate any of our colleagues, nor to ignore the justice that is due to our communities.
It is long overdue, and we're calling all debts. The Black agenda is due today.
Black Caucus Chair Senator Lightford says specific proposals will be nailed down by mid-November. And though usually, well, it's the General Assembly, it's politics, so things can be quite drawn out, Lightford says she does expect and demand that the legislature take up this package when they're back in Springfield in November. Brandis, back to you.
Up next, details on the latest local politician to plead guilty to corruption. But first, 2 years ago, his album Universal Beings landed on many top 10 lists for Album of the Year. So his new project comes with great expectations. Chicago-based drummer and producer Micaiah McCraven has been called a beat scientist. He mixes live performance with studio wizardry to make music that spans the globe and defies easy categories. Arts producer Mark Vitale met him at the Southwest Side headquarters of the Chicago label International Anthem.
New music accompanies a documentary shot in London, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. It's the latest from percussionist and band leader Micaiah McCraven, the subject of the film.
Music and art is best with a healthy dose of truth, honesty, and vulnerability. The music comes out of spontaneity and from the personalities of the musicians I'm working with. So it's very collaborative, and everybody who is performing with me kind of is a co-writer in this process. And then I take that kind of moment in time and freeze it or encapsulate it by using looping and different techniques to use that audio now as bits and pieces to make new composition or create form out of what came out of chaos.
McCraven was born in Paris. His father is an American jazz drummer, his mother a Hungarian folk musician. They raised him in Massachusetts.
I feel really fortunate to grow up in a household surrounded by music and art and different types of people and lifestyles. It's really kind of given me the opportunity to have a broad perspective.
His latest recording is Universal Beings, E and F sides. It's a musical sibling to his four-sided album from 2018, the highly praised Universal Beings. Some of the new music was recorded live at the Southside Cultural Hub, the Co-Prosperity Sphere.
One of the reasons I really like to record live is that then you can capture this kind of spirit in the room, something like intangible, you know, that's sometimes hard to catch in like a more sterile recording environment, like a studio.
You can't even guess it.
But if we go to London and we play a concert in a really cool space, or we do something at Co-Prosperity Sphere in Chicago and people are standing all around us and there's an incredible vibe, you know, being able to capture that in the recording is like a snapshot of the moment, and a moment that could be really fleeting.
We asked this very international musician how he's dealing with being stuck in the States.
Mainly, I've been trying to focus on my family and taking care of my kids and my wife and being a unit. And, you know, with what I've seen is just kind of a lot more challenging times kind of ahead of us. Just trying to really lean into all the silver linings I can and make the most of what I have to be as strong as I can to carry forth in the coming, you know, times, so I can be operating from a position of power.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Voila.
By the way, Micaiah McCraven moved to Chicago 16 years ago when his girlfriend at the time, now his wife, became a professor at Northwestern. Another fun fact, McCraven was captain of his high school football team and played both offense and defense. Visit our website for more information about Micaiah McCraven and Universal Beings. Up next, what we can expect from a tax holiday.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
Today marks the beginning of a payroll tax holiday. But don't get too attached to the extra cash. It's due back next April. The deferral comes as one of 4 executive orders President Trump signed to provide relief to Americans during the pandemic and boost the economy. But this one comes with concerns for both employees and their employers. Joining us to break down the tax deferral is Damon Jones, associate professor at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. He conducts research at the intersection of public finance, household finance, and behavioral economics. Damon Jones, thank you for joining us and welcome to Chicago Tonight. First, what is the payroll tax holiday?
So what it is an option or an encouragement for employers to stop collecting part of the payroll tax out of people's paycheck for the rest of the year. And then starting next year, so in the first quarter of next year, you're expected to pay those taxes back. So basically, you get a little extra time before you pay your regular payroll taxes. You can think about it as you getting a larger paycheck right now, and then in the future, when you have to pay those checks back, pay the taxes back, you're going to get a smaller paycheck.
So what is the president hoping this will do for the economy now?
I think the stated purpose is that if you don't pay your payroll taxes now, you have more money in your pockets that can hopefully try to stimulate the economy and also give you money to meet your various needs. There are a lot of people who are in high need right now. Many of them are unemployed who are not going to be affected by this policy. But for those who are employed, they still have needs. And I think the stated purpose is to get you some cash now in the short run.
So what does this mean then for employers? They'll be withholding that amount right now, but what does this mean for them?
So employers usually take money out of your paycheck and then send it to the government on behalf of you. They're being asked to possibly stop doing that. And only for some of their employees, the ones who earn under about $100,000 per year. And then next year, they're going to be asked to collect that money back and then send it back to the federal government. There's a lot of question marks about who's on the hook for those taxes if there's separation between the employer and the employee. So there's a lot of unknowns. So employers are being asked to not do business as usual, but to make a lot of adjustments to their payroll system.
So here's some things that we do know about the payroll tax deferral. As you said, this is for employees making less than $4,000 every 2 weeks. The tax deferral begins today and it runs through the end of the year. And as you also said, the taxes must be repaid by April 30th, 2021. Is this too much of a burden, Damon, to put on the employer?
This is going to be an administrative burden, and also there's some questions about liability. So if an employee leaves the firm, how does the employer get that money back from the employee to send to the federal government? Also, it seems to be optional. So some firms can decide to do it, and some are not going to do it because it's confusing. And so I think there are going to be some question marks for the firms. I think for the employees, there's also a lot of uncertainty. If you're not paying attention, you're going to notice that starting January 1st, you have a much smaller paycheck.
So according to a letter to Congress and the Treasury Department from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and more than 30 other trade organizations, a person who makes $35,000 a year, or that's $1,346 every 2 weeks, would have an increase of $83.46 every pay period. However, they'll owe $751.15 on April 30th, 2021. How's this going to affect the average worker?
Well, I think that there are a number of things. One is, will people notice that they're getting more in their paycheck? And what are they going to do with that extra amount? Some may just spend it. And so when they go to file their taxes, or when next year when they're deciding how they're going to pay back these taxes, it may come as a surprise, perhaps an unpleasant surprise. I think everyone would like money in the short run, but if this is money that you're going to have to turn around and pay back within a number of months, then there's a question about how useful it is. I think the bigger question is what could be done that is more fruitful, and that's probably to have legislation passed that actually gives people a true tax cut or continues to give people direct cash that is relief that you don't have to pay back.
Because I'm sure if some people, if they receive this extra money in their paycheck and maybe they save it because they know they're going to have to pay it back later on in April, is it really an economic boost, or is it beneficial to them at all if all they did was save it only to give it back to the government later on?
Yeah, in that case, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to give people a little extra money knowing that they're going to be on the hook for it in a couple of months. I think if you're really trying to stimulate the economy, you have to pump real cash into people's pockets. And this is basically like a loan. You have to pay it back, and sometimes loans can be helpful, but for other people, it may be too much uncertainty. Will you owe this money back? How will you pay it back? And we have a lot of uncertainty right now, and this is just adding on.
While the IRS released guidance just days before this order took effect, as you said, there's still a lot of unknowns from what happens for seasonal employees or for those who leave the company before the end of the year. We've got about 20 seconds left, Damon. President Trump said that he'll terminate the payroll tax if he's elected. Is this the kind of thing that you're saying would be actually beneficial to the economy?
I don't think so. I think that the payroll tax plays a central role in our Social Security system. And to just eliminate that would cause havoc on thinking about how we're funding it, how it's operated, and also the political stability of that type of program. And so I don't think that that's a good policy.
Okay, a lot of unknowns, but this has been helpful. Damon Jones, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, there are more homicides this year than all of last year, and there are still another 4 months left in 2020. We dig into the rising numbers. We'll have more with Illinois Congressmen on a coronavirus vaccine and concerns over students returning to school. After Black Panther star Chadwick Boseman's death, doctors sound the alarm on colon cancer in the Black community. Chicago's emergence as a global hub for quantum research and technologies that could transform the world. And inside a 1907 tavern, once owned by Schlitz, that's being restored by new owners and heading for city landmark status. But first, some more of today's top stories. Former Cook County Commissioner and McCook Mayor Jeffrey Tobolski pleads guilty to corruption charges in federal court. The West suburban politician admits to extorting tens of thousands of dollars in cash from a McCook restaurant and taking at least $250,000 in bribes while serving as an elected official. Tobolsky faces up to 14 years in prison, but the Chicago Tribune is reporting he could get a sentencing break if he continues to cooperate with the investigation. Tobolsky resigned from his positions in March. Charges are filed in the death of Caleb Reed, the 17-year-old activist who was shot and killed in late July in West Rogers Park. Authorities allege Reed was shot and killed accidentally by one of his own friends, 18-year-old Genove Martin. Martin has been charged with first-degree murder and is being held on $300,000 bond. Prosecutors say Martin and Reed were walking together when Martin began shooting at a car, which returned fire. They say Martin's last shot accidentally struck Reed, resulting in his death 2 days later at St. Francis Hospital. We'll have more on the city's grim pace of homicides coming up next. And the Illinois Department of Public Health is reporting almost 1,500 confirmed cases of coronavirus since yesterday, bringing the statewide total to more than 236,000 cases. State health officials also report 39 additional deaths for a total death toll of more than 8,000. Some very dismal data out of the Chicago Police Department today. The number of homicides in Chicago this year has exceeded last year's total, and there is still another 4 months left in 2020. Joining us now to go behind the numbers is WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson. So Matt, what exactly is the difference between this year's numbers and last year's?
Hey, Brandis. So as you said, Chicago in 2020 has already seen more murders across just 8 months than there were in all of 2019. So according to the CPD data that was released today, there were 506 homicides recorded through the end of August in 2020. There were not only, but there were 495 homicides recorded in all of 2019. According to the CPD data, there were also 63 homicides recorded throughout the month of August, which is down from the 105 that were recorded the previous month in July.
Does Superintendent Brown or the CPD, do they say why they think these numbers are worse this year?
Superintendent Brown has pointed out that this is an unprecedented year in policing for a lot of reasons, between stress that's built up from residents due to the coronavirus pandemic, civil unrest caused after the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. He's also repeatedly pointed out that gun offenders need to face longer sentences and stiffer bail requirements, saying that prosecutors need to do more to keep these people off the street when they commit these sorts of crimes.
Superintendent Brown has also said that the creation of teams like the Community Safety Team and the Critical Incident Response Team 6 weeks ago have improved or helped with the violence in the city. Does the data bear this out?
Well, there certainly have been fewer homicides in August compared to the previous month in July when these teams were rolled out. Again, there were more than 100 homicides throughout July. There were 63 last month. But I don't think it's quite clear yet that whether or not that decline can be attributed completely to the rollout of these teams. I think there's going to be more time that's needed to determine their actual impact.
Okay, and we'll see what the rest of the year holds, of course. Matt Masterson, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website. That's at WTTW.com/news. And now we go back to Phil with more from local members of Congress. Phil.
Earlier in the show, we heard from Congressman Danny Davis, Brad Schneider, and Rodney Davis about the president's visit to Kenosha and the next round of coronavirus relief from Congress. And the three join us once again. Gentlemen, as you know, the president signed an executive order deferring payroll tax for some workers in the U.S. starting today. And if their employers participate, it'll be a temporary boost to paychecks. But that tax bill will be coming due next year. Congressman Schneider, is that likely to help, or will it just create confusion?
No, I don't think it helps at all and creates a lot of confusion. A lot of employers and employees are wondering, do they not withhold those taxes today, and then 4 months from now, the tax bill's due and they have to pay it? And what about companies where there's a fair amount of turnover and those employees are long gone and the company's going to be left holding the bill? What we need is real relief. That real relief is what's contained in the HEROES Act that the House passed almost 4 months ago on May 15th. That will help our small businesses, provide them the relief, will help people who are out of work with unemployment insurance, will help families make ends meet with another payment of $1,200. These are the things, as we're in the midst of the crisis, we're seeing the spikes go up across the country and here in the Midwest, that we need to do. And the Senate needs to join with the House and try to do something that will provide immediate relief.
Congressman Rodney Davis says his temporary deferral help, or does it make things muddy?
You know, I don't know necessarily how much support that executive order proposal had on Capitol Hill from Republicans or Democrats, but I'm glad it's optional. It's going to be optional for the employee and the employer to put in place. But the sad part is we had so much good bipartisanship when we passed our first 4 bills that we now lump into the CARES Act. And unfortunately, Speaker Pelosi squandered that opportunity for bipartisan solutions by putting forth their $3.4 trillion liberal wish list that had no chance of becoming law. And here we are today.
Congressman Davis, last month, Congressman Rodney Davis, that is, last month you announced that you tested positive for COVID. How are you feeling?
No, I feel great. I was one of the lucky ones, didn't have any major symptoms. I just noticed a spike in temperature one day because my wife is a nurse and I've been taking my temp on the same thermometer every day since the pandemic begun. I went in to rule out COVID and unfortunately tested positive, but I didn't have any major symptoms. I got through my 10-day quarantine, and luckily none of my staff I was with a couple of days before or my family tested positive. I was the only one.
Congressman Danny Davis, the death rate as a result of coronavirus in the U.S. is now at the 200,000 level. How concerned are you about a possible fall surge?
I'm very much concerned, but I guess I'm optimistic because many of our research outlets are indeed working on a vaccine, and I hope that they are close and that we're going to have a vaccine. In the meantime, I think that what all of us can do is make sure that we follow the public health protocols. I am so glad that Rodney is doing okay. He's looking well and is vibrant. And I think that's what we have to do, is be as positive and as proactive as we can possibly be. We're going to lick this virus. It's going to take a lot of cooperation, a lot of work to do it. So I'm optimistic that we'll have a vaccine.
Congressman Schneider, as you know, there are a lot of models for going back to school, hybrid models, strictly remote, mixture of remote and in class. What are some of the things you're hearing from teachers, parents, students in your district?
Well, the first thing I'm hearing from everyone in my district is we want to get our kids back to school as quickly as possible, but safely as well. And this is crucial. In my district, we have 87% of the students in my district are doing remote learning. Another 10% are doing hybrid, and only 3% are able to be in the classroom because we're seeing this spike in levels. What we need is a national response to beating back this virus, as both my colleagues have talked about. I've introduced the COVID Prepare Act, which would require every agency in government to report to Congress and to the American people what they're doing to help us beat back the virus. With technology, the research going on into treatments, and hopefully a vaccine, we'll get our kids back. But the most important thing is to safely get our kids back to school as soon as we possibly can.
And gentlemen, I'd like a real quick reaction from you, yes or no, on whether or not you feel confident that mail-in ballots will be counted in a prompt way. Congressman Rodney Davis, yes or no?
Yes, because I believe in the Postal Service.
Congressman Danny Davis?
Yes, without a doubt. Illinois has a great system.
Congressman Schneider, are you confident that mail-in voting will go smoothly?
In Illinois, I'm very confident, but we got to make sure everyone knows their vote will be counted, they can vote safely, and the outcome of the election will reflect the will of the people.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Congressman Rodney Davis, Congressman Brad Schneider, and Congressman Danny Davis. Very much appreciated. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Phil, thank you. Actor Chadwick Boseman, probably best known for portraying the Marvel comic book character Black Panther, died from colon cancer last week at 43 years old. Though his death was a shock to fans around the world, it's becoming more common for young Black adults to contract colon cancer in the U.S. The medical community is bringing awareness to this disparity and screenings for this disease. Joining us now with more is Dr. Ed McDonald, gastroenterologist and Associate Director of Adult Nutrition at University of Chicago Medicine. Dr. McDonald, thank you so much for joining us. So when Black Panther was released, but before it was publicly known about Boseman's cancer diagnosis, you wrote about how Wakandans would be at lower risk to get colon cancer, specifically, obviously the fictional Wakandans. Why focus on colon cancer?
I did. So the movie came out in March, the same month as Colon Cancer Awareness Month. And it was a very popular movie, a movie that had a lot of cultural significance for African Americans. And I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of marry the significance of that movie with the significance of our increased risk of developing colon cancer. And I used that movie to basically talk about colon cancer screening and prevention. And one of the arguments that I made in Wakanda, it seemed like people embrace technology. And we have a lot of technology that exists that can actually help prevent colon cancer or at least lead to early detection of colon cancer, which can decrease the risk of dying from colon cancer.
You also wrote about some of the other reasons why Wakandans would be at lower risk.
Yeah, so there was a character in the movie that indicated that some of the Wakandans are vegetarians. So we know that adopting a plant-focused diet, which can include being vegan, being plant-based or pescatarian or Mediterranean diet, but ideally a diet where the plants are really the main component of the diet, can potentially decrease the risk of developing colon cancer. Other reasons, the Wakandans seem to exercise, so we know that weight can play a role when it comes to increasing our risk of developing colon cancer, and exercise can also decrease the role of developing colon cancer. So these are all lifestyle factors that can play a role that we all should really think about, especially after seeing what happened to Chadwick Boseman.
Now, in Cook County, blacks are 26% more likely to get colon and rectal cancers than white people. Why this disparity?
It's complicated. So in Cook County, I mean, there's a lot of issues involved in not only developing any type of cancer, but also having the opportunity to get screened for cancer. So screening rates are a little bit lower in the African American community than compared to white people, but they're not that much lower. So, you know, this is just the difference that we're seeing is not because people are just not getting colonoscopies. There's something else going on. So we know that the food plays a role. We know that exercise, again, can also play a role. But there are genetic factors, and then, you know, there's also structural racism involved. So we know that people with lower incomes also have a higher risk of developing cancer. And there's a variety of different reasons why, you know, all these different social determinants can affect colon cancer outcomes. But when we think about solutions, we also have to have all these different issues in mind when we're coming up with plans for solutions, because it's deeper than just telling people to get a colonoscopy. We have to look at access to colonoscopy. We also have to look at lifestyle.
What are, among some of the factors, are any chronic gut conditions potentially factors, for example, Crohn's or ulcerative colitis?
Yeah, so Crohn's, ulcerative colitis carry increased risk of developing colon cancer, primarily because these are inflammatory conditions. So most of the colon cancers that we're talking about for colon cancer screening, those are sporadic colon cancers, which is different than the colon cancer that's associated with inflammation. But people who do have inflammatory bowel disease, they should have colon cancer screening on their radar.
How soon should people be getting colonoscopies? And also, what are the other factors that might you know, make those colonoscopies happen earlier in your life rather than the standard recommendation, which I believe is 50?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a little bit of controversy with the standard recommendation. So recently, the American Cancer Society increased or decreased the age in which they recommend colon cancer screening to age 45 for all Americans. Now, other societies, such as the American Gastroenterology Association, they still recommend pursuing colonoscopy at age 50 for the average American. Now, however, African Americans across the board are now recommended to have colonoscopy starting at age 45. Now, and that's if you don't have a family history. If you have a family history of colon cancer, then you may have to start at age 40 or 10 years younger than your family member was diagnosed with colon cancer. So if someone was diagnosed, say, at age 45, that person should start colonoscopy, their colon cancer screening at age 35.
What if you're a little bit younger, and we've got just about 60 seconds left, you know, what are some of the symptoms that someone might consider going to see a doctor for?
So with colon cancer screening, the whole point of it is majority of colon cancers and polyps don't have any symptoms. So that's why people have to come in at particular ages, because we don't want you to develop symptoms. Now, for people who may be experiencing symptoms like blood in the stool, I would say that warrants a conversation with a physician, especially if you're over the age of 30. So blood in the stool can indicate cancer. It's not hands down the sole sign of cancer. There's a lot of different things that can cause blood in the stool, but nonetheless, that warrants an evaluation and discussion with at least a primary care doctor or gastroenterologist. Other symptoms could include severe constipation, but again, there's a lot of reasons to have constipation that don't involve colon cancer. So I don't want people to get too alarmed, but I do want people to actually have conversations with health professionals about the symptoms they're experiencing, but also recognize that colon cancer can be asymptomatic.
Bottom line, see your doctor if something weird is going on. Dr. Ed McDonald. Dr. Ed McDonald, thank you so much. I know we're catching you in between procedures, so thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And up next, how Chicago is becoming a hub for quantum technology. But first, a look at the weather.
The Patrick and Shirley Ryan Grant for Creativity, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship makes possible stories that enrich lives and inspire our communities.
Quantum technology is expected to transform our world. From the creation of ultra-fast and powerful quantum computers to sensors capable of detecting the movement of a single atom to unhackable communication networks. And Chicago appears to be at the center of this quantum acceleration as the Department of Energy announces that 2 of the 5 new national quantum research centers will be in the Chicago area. Joining us to tell us more are Anna Grassolino, Senior Scientist and Deputy Chief Technology Officer at Fermilab, and the Director of its Superconducting Quantum Materials and Systems Center. She's also an Associate Professor at Northwestern University. And David Aushalom, Senior Scientist at Argonne National Laboratory, Professor of Molecular Engineering and Physics at the University of Chicago, and the Director of the Chicago Quantum Exchange. Each lab is expected to receive $115 million over the next 5 years to further this research. David Aushalom, let's start with you, please. For someone like me who knows little to nothing about quantum computings or networks or sensors, and without getting into what I understand as quantum entanglement, explain why so many researchers across the world think that this is going to be the next big technological development.
It's a great question. And one of the exciting things about this field is we're able to now engineer the way matter behaves at its very smallest scale, at the level of individual atoms and electrons to our level. And the properties of nature at that level are distinctly different from what we see around us. And it means that we can develop technologies with sensors that are extremely precise and also communicate with one another in ways that are unhackable, extremely secure. So the way we think about information and the way we transmit it will be quite different.
Anna Grassolino, one of the things that Fermilab intends to do with this funding is to create a beyond state-of-the-art quantum computer. What's the time frame for that, and what will it be able to do compared to a conventional supercomputer?
So Fermilab, together with our 20 partners in this new exciting center, we would like to build, like you said, a beyond state-of-the-art quantum computer in about 5 years. So that's the timescale that we have given for our first prototype. And the very exciting part for Fermilab and for our partners is that we will combine the strengths of national labs such as Fermilab in superconducting technologies that we have been using every day here as our bread and butter to build accelerators. Now those will become the building blocks that can bring dramatic advancements in terms of quality of the qubits that will build this revolutionary quantum computer, and will combine forces, join forces with academia. So for example, locally Northwestern universities, but many other universities across the country, and with also industry, such as, for example, Rigetti Computing, which is a startup in Silicon Valley that has been building quantum computers already for many years. So it's a really exciting adventure. And we are really, we're looking forward to combine all these strengths to then what we will be able to really advance, first of all, for us as physicists, things that we could do, for example, simulate on a quantum computer, things like particle collisions. We build these very exciting large accelerators to study particles and their nature. But when we interpret the data, when we analyze it on a classical computer, it's not as powerful as when we will be able to do it on a quantum computer that is closer in nature to the things that we are trying to study. So that's just one of the examples.
Okay, and David Al-Shalom, you're the director of the Q Next Center, led by Argonne. Explain what it is or how you'll be using the funding that you're getting from the Department of Energy.
Yeah, our center was inspired by one of the challenges of quantum science, which is to focus on the science and the technology to control and distribute quantum information across distances ranging from within a computer chip to across the country. And so we've done this by creating 2 national quantum foundries, a type of quantum factory, if you like, to build semiconductor technologies at Argonne National Lab and superconducting materials at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory in California. So taken together, these quantum factories will produce materials for the supply chain for quantum tech. And similar to what Anna was saying, we partnered with 10 different companies and 10 different universities to push the science quickly into the technology front. And in the sensor areas, that means things like pushing magnetic resonance imaging, trying to look at the structure and function of single molecules to see how we can protect ourselves better and use pharmaceuticals efficiently.
Anna Grassolino, what will this mean for Chicago and Illinois if the area is emerging as sort of a leading hub for quantum research in the United States? Are we going to be like the next Silicon Valley, but for quantum research?
I think that's a good parallel. And, another way that I see it is when Fermilab built the Tevatron, we brought so many thousands of students, researchers from the country and from the globe even. And so this is such an exciting and high-tech initiative that will draw really a lot of students, but also a lot of companies, like David said. We will provide actually space here on campus for the companies from California to have people here to do the tech transfer. So I think this is an amazing initiative, and working together with David, with University of Chicago, with Argonne, with Northwestern University, it's really a unique. So we are 2 of the 5 national centers here in the area, and we will be building the most powerful quantum computers and the most powerful quantum networks, and then we can connect them together. This is really the way that I view it, that I see it as like the new Silicon Valley here in the Chicago area.
And David, we got about 20 seconds left, but how would you describe the potential economic impact on Chicago because of this?
I think it's going to be an extraordinary opportunity for Chicago. We've had great support from the state and the city. And the fact that companies and business schools are baked into this program means students will be encouraged to start new ventures here in Chicago, helping the state, helping the city, and more importantly, transferring these discoveries to society.
Okay, my thanks to Anna Grassolino and David Al-Shalom. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
A long-running tavern in Chicago's East Side neighborhood is heading for landmark status with the city. It's a bar that's lived a lot of lives, and its new owners see it as an important piece of a tight-knit but much-changed community. Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg recently went for a visit. Here's another look.
Before Mike and Laura Medina bought the bar at 94th Street in Ewing on the far south side, the building went through many incarnations. It was built in 1907.
This is one of, I think, about 60 tied houses that Schlitz Brewing Company built as a way to have a place to exclusively sell their beer.
Instead of selling their product to bars, brewers just started owning and operating their own.
Most of the major American brewers at the time did this. Schlitz by far built the most in the city.
After Prohibition, tied houses were regulated out of existence, but some of them, including this one, kept going as privately owned bars.
In the late 40s through the early 50s, there was a group of brothers by the last name of Popovich, ran it as a place then called Club Cello.
They didn't just run the bar, they performed in it for live audiences and on the radio.
I want to see you every Saturday and Sunday. Come down and hear the Tamburica music in the continental style as played by the Popovich Brothers Tamburica Orchestra.
And since they bought the building last year, the Medinas have found and been given artifacts from the bar's history.
An old telephone, a little box with foreign currency in it from when foreign ships were coming down the St. Lawrence.
And things related to the largely untouched rooming house on the second floor.
Like a rooms for rent sign, a bunch of skeleton keys that would have probably gone to some of the rooms upstairs.
From the 1970s until it closed down a few years ago, the bar was known as the Bamboo Lounge, and you'd better believe the Medinas have the sexy matchbooks to prove it.
On top of just the ephemera that we found, it's just the originality of the building. They never gutted anything, never modernized it to a point that you couldn't get a sense of what it used to look like, which is really cool.
When Schlitz built a tied house, they weren't shy about it, announcing it to the world with a giant logo carved right into the facade. They also had, in the now boarded up opening behind me, a stained glass window, also with the Schlitz logo and a really great design. It was removed sometime before the Medinas purchased this property.
We've been trying to track down who has it, to approach them and see if they're willing to, part with it, because we feel it belongs there.
In the meantime, the Medinas were put in touch with a stained glass artist who had been given the original blueprint for the window.
The glass company that made the glass for the window originally is still around. And this gentleman said, well, if you can't get the original window back, I could make you a new one using the same glass.
Whether or not they end up with the original window, the Medinas say they're excited to preserve this piece of Chicago, in a neighborhood with few landmarks, a part of town once fueled by long-gone industrial jobs, but one the Medinas say is tight-knit.
There's a lot of neighbors around here that have very good memories of this building, the people in it, the times they had here. That's not disposable. It's no less significant just because it's at 94th Street in Ewing than it is if it was on the maybe a more prosperous side of town.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
The Medinas hope to reopen the bar, which they're calling the East Side Tap, sometime next year. Once it's approved by the City Council, the building will join 9 other former Schlitz properties as Chicago landmarks. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.